Hello my geometry cats and kittens. Today we are looking at 7.4. What is trigonometry? Trigonometry. Now this section may look scary, but I assure you it's not as bad as what you think it is. So first thing we have to know when we talk about trigonometry is, what is trigonometry? Well, it's the study of triangle measurements. I won't get too deep into why it works, but it deals with similar triangles and ratios of similar triangles, actually. But I won't dive too deep into the how it works. I'm just going to get into the why it works. I'm going to get into the how it works. So in geometry, we are going to learn these three trigonometric ratios. Okay, we're going to learn about sine, cosine, and tangent. And we're going to write those as sin, but it's actually sine, cosine, and tan. Something you don't get in Michigan in the winter. So, the ratio of sine, if you're doing sine of an angle, like let's say we're going to look at sine of A, it's the opposite leg to the hypotenuse. Now, the opposite leg is the side of the triangle that angle's not touching. Okay? And the hypotenuse is always the hypotenuse, is always the longest side. So sine of A is my little a, my opposite, over my little c, my hypotenuse. Now be careful, because when I look at B, now for B, this side A is not the opposite. This side is the opposite. This is still the hypotenuse. The opposite changes based on the angle you're looking at. Because when you're on opposite sides of the room, you're not touching that person. You're far away from them. Okay? So keep that in mind. Opposite is always the side not touching the angle. So for sine of B, our opposite is little b. Our hypotenuse is C. Now when we do cosine, we're doing adjacent over hypotenuse. So my adjacent side for A, see how I changed color? Adjacent means next to. So for A, this side is adjacent. It's the side touching A, that's not the hypotenuse. So for cosine of A, it'd be B over C. Now when I move to B, again my opposite and adjacent change, because side A is touching B. Okay, so for this one it'll be A over C. Now for no, don't restart. Now I look at tan of A, I'm looking at the opposite over adjacent. So for A, my opposite was A, and my adjacent was B for A, because it changes based on the angle we're looking at. Whereas for B, it's opposite over adjacent. For B, my opposite is B, adjacent's A. Alright? Alright. Alright, so remember, one time I went out for a walk and I stubbed my toe really hard on a rock and it hurt so bad. I kept walking and it hurt, and walking and it hurt, and walking and it hurt. And finally I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me, you know what you need to do, Mr. Twilliger? He said, you need to one second, I need to get this working. He said you need to toe. My doctor told me I needed to soak my toe. And what does that mean? Who knows? No, I do. It tells me sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So, opposite over hypotenuse, I always write like this. So, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. and TOA. Tan is opposite over adjacent. Alright, let's do this then. Let's try one. So let's take a look at number 1. Find sine of A. So, first thing I like to do is when I'm looking at trig functions is I label my sides as the opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. So when I look at A, the side opposite is 5. That's my O. The hypotenuse is always my longest side. And then the side touching A, this 12, is my A, my adjacent. So sine of A, when I look up here, is O over H. Oh. So now all I do is I look at the picture. My O is 5. My H is 13. There we go. That's my ratio. So I'm going to go do cosine. Cosine of A, well, that's adjacent over hypotenuse, A over H. So I go over here. A is 12. H is 13. And then I'm going to find tan of A. Tan of A is opposite over adjacent. So I'm going to do 5 over 12. So once it's labeled, this is pretty straightforward actually. You're doing trig. You're doing legit rocket science. I'm proud of you guys. Now when I go to C, my hypotenuse is always the hypotenuse. But now the side opposite C, that's not touching it, is 12. So this becomes my O. And this becomes my A, because it's touching it. It's actually touching that angle. It's next to it. So sine of C is my opposite over hypotenuse. So now my opposite is 12, and my hypotenuse is 13. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So it's 5 over 13. And tan is opposite over adjacent. So now that's 12 over 5. Sorry for the weird cut. I was just checking time. And I realized we're good for today. So hopefully you learned something. I just want to say, have a great day.